Hi, I'm Vahaken Mouradian, contributing editor at Merriam-West, and I'm delighted today to be in the company of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, research fellow at the Hoover Institution, and author most recently of the book Prey, Immigration, Islam, and the Erosion of Women's Rights. Ayaan, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Vahaken, thank you very much for having me.
So after two memoirs of noted literary quality and two treatises for an Islamic Reformation, you offer with your latest book something much more social scientific. You take on perhaps the most barbed European public policy question of our time, mass migration. So how and why did you decide to write Prey?
Well, I think mass migration has been a topic in Europe, and a very controversial one for decades now. And I would say one of the, it had been talked about, but not, we weren't having an honest conversation about the impacts of young men coming from Muslim majority countries on the rights of women. You would have anecdotal evidence, sometimes in newspapers, sometimes online. And what I say, in birthday parties, people in close proximity, behind closed doors, would say, this is what happened to my daughter, this is what happened to me, and that sort of thing. But there was this sense of, it's just, let's look away from it. It's a taboo around what's happening on European streets in neighborhoods as a direct consequence of immigration and what's happening to women.
So you sought asylum in the Netherlands in 1992 at the age of 22, a decade after which you were elected to the Dutch parliament. Now this is atypical, a degree of integration one would expect to see intergenerationally. But what is different about today's asylum seekers arriving on European shores, and why are you pessimistic about their prospects of joining European society?
So on a personal level, I had a choice. And one choice was to do exactly as my father had directed me to, which was to go to Canada and join the man that he had married me off to. That was one choice. The other, I rejected that. I didn't want to do that. And I went to the Netherlands and asked for asylum. So the only path forward for me on a personal level was to assimilate. That is, not just learn language, but also be open to the values and the norms and the ways of being a good contributing citizen of the Netherlands. And I think that for most asylum seekers today, that is exactly the choice. Either they go back to the lives that they had left behind that they didn't want to be a part of, or they embark on the journey of integrating or assimilating into the host societies. Now, many people find that incredibly difficult. And I've written in my book, Nomad, on some of the reasons why that is difficult, but it's not impossible. And you have, in Prey, it's about young men who come from societies where women are seen as commodities, and women are divided into the good and the bad. And the bad, the ones they consider bad, are attacked, and they're considered prey, and they're attacked with impunity. And so coming into Europe, they see independent women who dress as they please, who go about their lives as they please. And from the perspective of the young man who comes from a society where that type of woman is considered bad, then he doesn't see a fellow human being, he sees prey. And that the problems that, that begets, that's emerging in these societies. And it's unfortunate that the European leadership didn't anticipate these problems, they should have. And now that the problems are unfolding, they're doing very little to protect the public space to be safe for women, all women, regardless of their age or their skin color or whatever, what have you.
You acknowledge some of the obvious objections to your thesis early on in the book, namely that sexual violence is ubiquitous, yes, that it is primarily a young male problem, that there are several related entangled variables like unemployment and illiteracy and possibly racism. What convinces you, however, that in having identified the Islamic religious and cultural factor, that you have identified the right one, the operative one?
So everything you've said is true. Sexual violence is a universal issue, and it is practiced everywhere in the world, or committed, I must say. But in Europe, for a period of time, things had actually moved on from, let's say, the common human condition. And institutions were established. There was a women's liberation movement. And what we had achieved was what I had encountered in 1992 when I first came to Europe, women who were free and safe and emancipated. And that is, I think, what we are seeing now, is that this encounter and sometimes collision between men who come from societies where that hasn't happened into societies where women think of themselves as free agents. You know, to your question, is every Muslim man a predator? Absolutely not. Is every immigrant man a predator? Absolutely not. Do factors such as disenfranchisement, racism, the suffering that these young men themselves have gone through, do these things matter? They do. All of that is absolutely relevant. But yes, the key factor is right now, if you look at this sudden, it's almost like a flip where sexual violence has gone steep, vertical, just like that. And you can see that there is a direct link between the arrival of these young men and this behavior. Then I think it would be a good thing, A, to acknowledge it, B, to protect the women, and C, it would be even better for the men themselves to understand that they're entering a different society, and that if they adapt and behave in a respectful way, abide by the law, that in fact their chances of success are way higher than if they engage in this misconduct.
This issue is a precarious one, not just because of the peculiar cultural sensitivities of our historical moment. You have also encountered significant methodological obstacles, such as inconsistent data, different definitions of sexual crime across European states and within them over time.
Yeah.
How did you deal with this problem of missing at times and at other times inconsistent data? And has that at all weakened your conviction in your arguments and your conclusions?
Well, what I observe as I delve into this issue is that the agencies who are paid to collect this data have in some ways been confused by the people who ask them to gather this data, the politicians, the policymakers, the senior editors in newspapers and other news outlets. Traditionally, because of especially the Second World War and the history of colonialism and all sorts of things that bad stuff that Europeans did in the past, there is no, in many countries, when data on crime is gathered, religion is left out, ethnicity is left out, nationality is left out. Now, in order for the thesis of this book to work, I would need all of this data. Where does a perpetrator come from? Not just his age, but yes, his skin color, his religion, his tradition, his nationality, all of that is relevant. And most of these agencies say, we simply don't do that. Now, some countries are changing. I've seen a certain shift in Denmark. I've seen a certain shift in Austria. But there are also other ways of finding this data. For instance, by talking to victims. Who was your attacker? And it's more difficult, it is harder, it's more expensive, but you can get to the real data with just a touch more effort. But the point I make in the book is, given how difficult it is to find reliable data, the first step is actually to throw away all of these barriers and do get the reliable data. Because what I have found in the book is strong enough to suggest that there is a correlation between mass migration from Muslim majority countries and the increase in sexual violence. And this is not the last word on it. This is just to say that correlation is that it's strong enough, let's build on it. Now, are we going to do it? I don't know. I think in some countries we will see a change, in others we won't.
One can't help but noticing that your memoirs, Infidel and Nomad, were bestowed back cover blurbs by institutions like the New York Times, by the Daily Beast, by Kirkus Reviews. Prey, on the other hand, its hardcover features the words of individuals like Henry Kissinger, like Senator Tom Cotton and Megyn Kelly. Has your audience changed over the past 5 to 10 years? And if so, why do you think that is?
I don't think the audience has changed, but I think the center-left establishment media right now in the United States of America are either terrified of the woke or they are woke. So the fact that people like Jim Bennett and Barry Weiss are fired from the New York Times op-ed pages or had to resign, that tells you enough that taking on a subject where immigration is looked at critically and its negative impact on women, I think that is precisely the sort of topic that the New York Times and Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, it's precisely the sort of topic that right now they would avoid. If you look at the Me Too movement, by the way, the New York Times was reluctant to take that on, just for the record. But if you look at the Me Too, what you see is it's a powerful men, white men, heterosexual men preying on women in the workplace. And for them, it was easier to take that topic on than to have young immigrant men who are fleeing civil war, who have gone through hell crossing the Mediterranean and other routes to come into Europe, and even associating these people who are seen as victims with anything negative is something in the age of identity politics that I think mainstream media is just not going to do it. So it's left to outlets like yours.
And we're happy to fill the vacuum, if I may say so.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we always need good reporting and quality reporting. So it's good, like people like you are getting into that space.
The charge of hypocrisy might be the lowest form of critique, but it's the main one that Jill Filipovich wields against you in her review of Prey in the New York Times. From that review, I quote yours. Proposed solutions include ramping up policing, harsher criminal penalties, and intrusions into what Filipovich redundantly calls personal privacy. To rephrase her arguments and also give you a chance to respond, how can you, Ayaan, a liberal, recommend illiberal asylum and law enforcement policies?
Well, first of all, the law enforcement policies in Europe were not designed for the context, the problem of mass migration, people coming from really violent contexts into Europe. And what I've noticed, again, and I think anybody who does the same research will see, is that the punishment sometimes very, very often does not fit the crime. There are stories there of men who have raped or participated in gang rapes who've been let out because of cultural defense. And what kind of justice is that for the female victim? Jill Filipovich doesn't touch on that. So this isn't about an illiberal or harsher justice system. It is about finding the right balance between the crime and the punishment for that to fit into one. Because punishment has at some point also to be a deterrent. And right now, these punishments that in Europe for rapes and harassments and sexual violence against women are simply not meeting the condition of deterrence. In terms of asylum, right now, because of I think it's the failure of European leadership. People who want to come and make a living in Europe from outside Europe, they can only do it through one path, and that is the path of asylum. And that's not what the asylum laws were designed for. So you have economic migrants, and I think economic migration is fantastic. It's in fact the best sort of migration. But the Europeans don't have a framework for that, or not an effective one. That needs to be changed. And so it's not hypocrisy, it's not harsh. This is a proposal, and it can always be dismissed, but a proposal for elected officials and free societies to decide and reconsider how they're going to reorganize immigration and immigration policies to fit in with the demands and the difficulties of today.
Your argument, curiously for me at least, does not encompass the United States. Do you think America is exceptionally capable of immigrant integration, or just for some reason fundamentally unlike Europe?
I think compared to Europe, America's, from its conception, it was an immigration nation, but immigration to America has always been selective. And at first, it was natural selection. If you were able to survive here and thrive, then you survived and thrived. Otherwise, you didn't. And there were a lot of immigrants who went back to Europe. And then later on, there was a huge selection. You had to come here and fend for yourself and have family. You had to be healthy. You had to have work. So it was always selective. It still continues to be selective. There is a similarity, however, and that is with the Northern Triangle now, where lots and lots of people from Central and South America are coming in spontaneously in large numbers. And that might present similar problems to what I described in Prey. But that is so fresh and so new. I haven't done any research on it. I don't know of anyone else who has actually done that. So there might be a similarity there when, you have this unmanaged ad hoc stream of people coming in and then going straight into the illegal sphere. I know that there is a rise in crime due to that, but there's also the debate is too heated at this point in America to find, cool heads who will say, let's have a ledger of what is good about this type of immigration and what is not so good about it. Now, having said all of that, when it comes to crime and punishment in America, I think it's already, the debates we're having in America about the criminal justice system is it's too harsh. Let's make it more lenient. Whereas in Europe, it's too lenient. And it's a way of, finding some sort of justice for the victims, but also developing a system that actually is a deterrent. And right now in Europe, it's not.
For what it's worth, there is considerable longitudinal data that suggests that taken as a whole and on average, immigrants in the United States are far less criminal, far less likely to commit crimes than the native born. But I take your point that that perhaps such data needs to be updated and very constantly and consistently maintained to ensure that we have the best knowledge available.
Absolutely.
Luckily, we have you in the United States now to be part of this debate. In his imperishable memoir, Christopher Hitchens writes that you were the first person he had thought of inviting to his naturalization ceremony at the Jefferson Memorial in April of 2007, which you attended.
Yes.
Had you by then already decided that America was to be your home too?
Yes, at that point, so this is 2006, and look, I was coming in under different circumstances, can't be compared to the people who are coming in from Central and South America into America, or coming from the Middle East, South Asia, Africa into Europe. But even under those circumstances, I had to go through that whole process of, applying for a visa and applying for the green card, and you had to meet all of this. This is what I meant by selective. In order to become to get the green card, they even test you on TBC and HIV and all that. And if you test positive, you don't get a green card. And then again, that whole process of citizenship. And because it's something I wanted it. It's something I desired. I really, and I feel that I am a part of this community, and so was Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens was a citizen of the UK and decided to become an American citizen because what Christopher and I shared was the idea of America is so great and so fantastic. And I think that America does have a better infrastructure in place to attract that type of immigrant, the immigrant who comes here and wants to be here and appreciates being here. Having said that, again, I still think just having this type of, caravans full of people attracted to a certain degree to the welfare state is going to pose similar problems to America as we have in Europe. So I just don't want Americans to look at Europe and think, oh, those dumb Europeans. It's not like that.
But there's a smaller welfare state, generally speaking, in America than in Europe, correct? So that might not be as large of an incentive in this case.
It is. And also in America, I think the economic system makes it possible. People who come to America start businesses, 3 or 4 months into their residence, even sometimes as illegal residents. There's all sorts of employment. And Americans love economic migration. And in fact, that's the type of immigrant we want to attract. Whereas in Europe, in sort of the various national narratives, economic migrants have been demonized. And so the only way left is for people to seek asylum. And when you seek asylum, because that just doesn't fit into the asylum, into the system, but you're also automatically subjected to the government taking care of you. And sometimes lots of immigrants, get trapped in that system.
Since we brought up the Hitch, he was also very picky and precise with words, a trait that I think
is very good.
And he identified in you, given his writing. What do you think of the word Islamophobia as it has frequently been deployed against you?
Well, I think the first thing that Christopher noticed, and I did, and anybody who's paying attention will notice, is that Islam is a set of ideas, beliefs. It's a religion. It's not a race, number one. And number two, in the name of Islam, certain things have been done that people are legitimately afraid of. I don't want to dwell on it, but the gruesome behavior of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and those that they have inspired, beheading people, bombing innocent people and terrorizing, running people over with trucks and cars. That sort of behavior, it's been legitimized and done, invoked in the name of Islam. So the fear, if people are afraid of Islam, is legitimate. It's not a phobia. And then number three, there are those who are trying to proselytize and spread Islam, and especially its radical strains, who don't want to be questioned. They don't want to be questioned about what Islam says about women, about homosexuals, about Jews, about Christians, about people like me who have left the faith. And they don't want to answer those questions, so they throw around this word Islamophobia and accuse the people who are asking these legitimate questions of being bigoted. They're riding on the coattails of other social movements, but that doesn't work. And I think they hate it when people like Christopher Hitchens see right through this mess and say, no, we're not going to buy that. Unfortunately, though, Christopher Hitchens and I have failed, because Islamophobia is now, it's a term, it's part of the lexicon of identity politics. It's something that you can throw around effectively to shut down debate on Islam.
You have previously been listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center as an anti-Muslim extremist. And in 2010, Anwar al-Awlaki, who has since been acquainted with An American Drone, very considerately, very, very lovably thought to include you on a hit list. I hope this doesn't come across as a rhetorical or unfair question. Mm-hmm. How does it feel to be perhaps the only point of agreement and convergence between the SPLC and Al-Qaeda?
And it's not only me. First of all, the SPLC, again, as an organization back in the day, they had what I would say a legitimate mission to draw to the attention of Americans what was done to Blacks, the lynchings, the discrimination, the segregation, that sort of thing. And I think to a certain degree they did succeed, but then that organization morphed into something else entirely different, where they frightened mostly poor Jewish people into giving them a lot of money, because Jewish people do care about discrimination and anti-Semitism and all that. But then also the wider society at large. And what they do with that money, I don't know, but they have taken to going after people like me, like Majid Nawaz. And right now, I just see them as a bunch of charlatans, really. They are not, I'm not sure they know that in many ways, inadvertently, that they're affiliated with Al-Qaeda. It's not only you who draws this conclusion, but it is by, first of all, drawing up a list of people that Al-Qaeda would also draw up and publishing that list. Implicit in that is, these people, it's legitimate to attack these people. So I don't know if the SPLC and their leadership know this. They have apologized to Majid Nawaz, but that's only after he took them to court. I think they took my name off that list, but there are still people on their list that should not be on their list of so-called bigoted people.
And it's unclear if that benefited Majid at all, given now that Quilliam, his organization, I believe, is no more, correct? The damage may have been done already. May I offer a confession as we get close to the end here?
Yes, please.
I really miss the old literary voice of Ayaan, the voice of Infidel and of the Portable Atheist, that inimitable essay you wrote at the end of Hitchens' edited volume. What's going to be the next thing on your writing desk?
I'm thinking of trying to, I see an emerging attraction towards tribalism in America and maybe in the wider Western society. That is the attitude of unquestioningly being faithful to something. It could be in where I come from, it's the bloodline, but now here it's politics. You are on this side of the aisle or on that side of the aisle, but then in such a way that you're uncritical and that you loathe and hate the other side. And that in some ways you're willing to go from just despising people to legitimizing violence. And I find that fascinating, this tribal impulse. And I'd like to spend more time looking at it and writing about it.
Well, you published an essay just a few days ago in Unheard, I believe, on that matter precisely.
Yes.
It's interesting to see you compare tribalism here with the tribalism you observed as a child in Somalia and perhaps in Kenya, where one might make deductions about the other based on the proportions of his forehead or the way one frowns.
Or their accents, and decide those people are evil. And I'm seeing things like this here, and I think it's fascinating to watch that, to see that maybe it's not, you can't snuff out the tribal impulse out of humanity. But there are ways of dealing with it. Sports is one way. I mean, my husband is a fan of Arsenal. And when he's supporting them, he gets a little tribal. And I think maybe that's how the West dealt with it, is by creating all these sports organizations so young men can channel their energy, their negative energy into that. And then once you leave the stadium, though, you're back to civilization. So who knows? But that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, the outlets, yeah.
Well, I hope that next book gives us, I trust it will give us occasion to do this again, and hopefully in person and with a couple of glasses of iced Greek coffee.
Yeah.
Until then, Ayaan, thank you very much once again for speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vahaken. Thank you very much for having me, and for the kind words, and also for bringing up Christopher Hitchens, whom I hope that we never forget.